And thank you for attending our Master Gardener class, A Homeowner's Guide to Fire Recovery, presented tonight by UC Master Gardeners of El Dorado County, El Dorado and Georgetown Divide Resource Conservation District, and the California Native Plant Society. Our presenters today are Kit Veerkamp, Alice Cantelow, and Mark Egbert. Kit Veerkamp is a retired landscape architect with 40 years experience working to design and construct projects throughout the greater Sacramento region, including being the first park planner for the El Dorado County area. Besides being a master gardener, Kit also serves as the horticulture chair for the El Dorado chapter of the California Native Plant Society and is heading up the new biodiversity initiative with the California chapter of the Association of Professional Landscape Designers and serving on the board of the Sacramento district. She is also actively participating in the Georgetown Divide Fire Safe Council, teaching residents how to be more fire resilient by hardening their homes and creating defensible space. As a master gardener, Kit teaches courses focusing on improving soils, landscaping for pollinators, and beneficial insects, natural pest management, water-wise landscaping, gardening with native plants, and so much more. Alice Cantelow is the president of the El Dorado County chapter of the Native Plant Society of the California Native Plant Society, CNPS, which works to understand, preserve, and celebrate the native vegetation of the west slope of the county. A master gardener for 9 years, Alice lost her cabin in the Caldor fire. She knows the angst of finding beloved land, trees, and other plants scorched. She has been an active member of her local Fire Safe Council for several years, chairing the Defensible Space Hardening Home Committee. She is also working at the state level with CNPS to improve fire resilience throughout the state of California. Our final speaker tonight is Mark Egbert. He is the district manager for the El Dorado and Georgetown Divide Resource Conservation Districts. RCDs are a grassroots government organization that advise and assist individual landowners and public agencies in planning and implementation of conservation practices for the protection, restoration, or development of land, water, and related natural resources. The El Dorado County Resource Conservation District was developed in 1940, and the Georgetown Divide Resource Conservation District in 1953. RCDs are local, independent, non-enforcement, non-regulatory, self-governed districts organized under District 9 of the Public Resources Code. Each district has a 5-member board of directors who serve without compensation for a 4-year term period. Each RCD advises and assists individual landowners and public agencies in planning and implementation of conservation practices for the protection, restoration, or development of land, water, and related natural resources. So our class tonight is going to be about an hour and a half long, and we'll offer a question and answer period after. We are very much appreciate and encourage your questions, and we'll do our best to address all of them at the end of the presentation. Please use the chat feature, and if you have a question for a specific speaker, please indicate that speaker in your chat question, and we'll get to those at the end. The class tonight will be recorded and posted on the UC Master Gardeners of El Dorado County website, as well as the UCCE Central Sierra YouTube channel, so that you can access these materials and resources after our class. We will be emailing you a follow-up survey in 3 months, and the purpose of the survey is to find out if you learned and implemented what you saw tonight from this Master Gardener class. Please take a moment to fill out the survey as it helps us improve our program. Having said that, let's get going, and I'll turn the class over to our presenters. I believe Alice Cantelow will be our first speaker tonight. Thank you, Alice.
Actually, I'm going to start with an introduction to what we're doing. We decided to do this for the residents primarily, or the survivors of the Caldor fire. As we're well aware, in the state of California, 2021 is on track to exceed the historic losses of property and wildlands that occurred in 2020, which also broke previous records. Each year is getting successively worse. As we know too well, a significant portion of our county did not escape the ravages of the Caldor fire and has destroyed over 1,000 structures. 85 more were damaged, and displaced over 53,000 residents during the time of evacuations throughout the fire time. And it's still not over, but I think everybody's been able to go home. This particular presentation is based on the California Native Plant Society's updated statewide guide that was designed with input from leading experts and is based on science. It's science-based guidance for those who are working towards the recovery of their land in order to reduce fire risks as we go forward. The last thing we want to have happen is to ever face this again at any point in time. So it's being, as Tracy mentioned, it's a collaboration between Master Gardeners, CNPS, and the RCD. And hopefully we will be able to answer a lot of concerns, kind of get things off the ground. And as we were talking before, this started because there's a lot of people out there wanting to help those who've been displaced, who have nothing to go back to, who even those whose homes survived, perhaps the landscapes didn't. And what the last thing we want to see anybody do is find themselves going back and perhaps doing things that aren't taking into account practices that may make things not the best in the future. So anyway, with that, Alice is going to start our presentation. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, Kit. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I have the first slide up here because Kit already talked about the homeowner's guide. It does exist in physical form also, and it's available online, but a lot of what we'll be talking about today is covered in there in more detail. So today we're just going to give you a fairly brief overview of fire ecology, and then we're going to cover some frequently asked questions that people have after a fire, and then address in more detail common areas of concern like the fire damaged trees, soil erosion, which is a really big deal, reseeding, whether you do or don't want to do that, and then of course defensible space so that we don't, like she said, have problems again in the future. Just a quick little review. Just remember that California is an incredibly special place. We have the highest number of native plants anywhere in the United States. We're a biodiversity hotspot, one of the only ones in the United States. And so it's a really special place, and the plants here are really special. We have a Mediterranean climate, which unfortunately, with those long, dry, hot summers and the winds we get in the fall, can be a perfect stage for wildfire, as we all know. And that wildfire has been going on for a long time. It shapes our land, it shapes our animals, and it shapes our plants. California is fire adapted. And the native plants have all kinds of different adaptations to deal with this. Some of them prepare by the way they grow. So something like a ponderosa there might have a very tall crown. It sort of self-prunes where the lower branches fall off. When they're younger, they're not so fire resilient, but when they're older like this, they can get to be quite fire resilient. Other native plants are bulbs with rhizomes, then way down deep in the soil or on the surface of soil, so a surface fire can come through and they will survive just fine. Other things like black oak might have very thick bark, real deep roots, and they can survive. Then we have other plants that survive the fire and afterwards come back. Things like black oak. Here, this black oak has been completely cut down, and yet it has sprouted about 10 different sprouts. Most oaks do resprout. And then also we have plants where the seeds open with fire. So either sometimes the smoke itself can induce them to open, sometimes it's the heat, and you can get these amazing fields of wildflowers actually after a fire, which is encouraging. And just a quick review of fire behavior. Of course, we all know it goes very fast up slopes, very fast up canyons, partly because you have vegetation feeding the next vegetation up, and zip up it goes. If our homes are right on the edge, we're at higher risk, of course. And then historically, it was that we had surface fires mostly. This would have been mostly set by the indigenous people. And so because they did this fairly frequently, there wasn't a lot of understory. You would have little fires like this, weren't particularly intense. They'd keep everything nice and clean in the forest. But of course, that's different now. We have more fuels, so those surface fires start to get bigger, and as they hit ladder fuels, they get taller. It's good to remember, though, that crown fires in general, which is where the tops of the trees are involved, they don't actually spread tree to tree unless there's that understory beneath. So just going from one tree to a next with nothing underneath usually doesn't happen. And so they will usually drop to the ground if they come to a clear area and get down to being a surface fire, or if there are ladder fuels, it will take the fire back up to the crown. And then, of course, we all know how wind can fan flames, and that sort of goes without saying. What's interesting is the Caldor fire and actually the King fire, the other big fire in our county not that long ago, kind of followed the prevailing westerly winds. They went in the same direction as our normal winds go, and we were actually fairly fortunate that we didn't have super intense winds. Someplace like the Camp Fire up in Paradise, the winds went the exact opposite direction. Those are called the Fern winds, which are kind of like the Santa Ana winds, and those are the ones that can be even more dangerous. So the Dixie Fire went this way, the Caldor Fire, the King Fire, a lot of them just follow these westerly patterns. The other thing interesting about wildfire is it does burn with mixed severity, at least in the oak woodlands and the conifer forest like we had here. In chaparral, it can be very, very intense and everything burns. But in places like the forest and the oak woodlands, it's usually mixed. So you have some areas that are burned very intensely, other areas that hardly get burned at all, and you kind of have this mosaic going on. And what the result is that you have kind of patchy habitat too. So you get these areas like this of nice open meadows, other areas where maybe the fire wasn't too intense and you have some things scorched. You get these very rich, with a large diversity of species, habitats. If we look at this is the soil burn severity for the Caldor fire, it's kind of interesting to see just how that patchiness did indeed happen with the Caldor fire. The dark green here is basically not burned at all. So if you look in the perimeter, though, the lighter bluish green color is where there's very low intensity fire. The yellow was moderate intensity, and the red was high intensity. There was a lot of high intensity that went on with the Caldor fire, but certainly not everywhere. But in the Grizzly Flat and the forest north of that, it was a lot of high intensity. Here in the Silver Fork area, and then also along Highway 50. Those were the areas that were particularly intense. If you get kind of a little bit closer in on Grizzly Flats and that area, you can see, though, just how patchy it was even within that, which is why some areas maybe homes were destroyed, others maybe not, and certainly the forest and the plants in those areas would look different depending on how intense the fire was. So you kind of wonder, we always wonder, why are we suddenly having all these intense fires? And I'm just going to quickly go through this. Our fire regime has indeed changed. Because California has changed. We've had 100+ years now of fire suppression where we really worked to stop all fires, which sounded like a good idea at the time, but it's resulted in these fuel buildups. Here we have some manzanita that just, without a fire, things just build up all the dead material and also all the live material like this understory. We've also favored in the past removal of the more resilient large trees, those nice big trees that are so resilient. Those are the ones we want to use in the past for our homes, of course, and for lumber. And so what that's left us with is lots of smaller, denser trees that are much more prone to wildfire. And as you get these little ones in there that can then act as ladder fuels for the taller ones. Also, of course, the changing climate is indeed a factor. This is a graph since 1895, so between 1895 here and up to the current, of the annual average temperature in California, and you can see it is indeed rising. And part of what's happened is we're getting longer droughts, the vegetation is getting more dried out, and it's getting even more ripe for wildfire than before, and more intense ones. And with those droughts, we kind of think of a drought as just, oh, you mean there's a problem with water, but of course it also affects the plants. And not only are they stressed by not easily getting enough water, but then the insects come in and attack them also. And so we're getting more and more insect attacked, which then is even more prone to fires, hence intensity. And still another thing is invasive species, which have really come in a lot over the last 100, 150 years with the European colonization. And we have this particular one is star thistle, but you can see all that thatch. You can get these huge fields with lots of dry material, and those invasive species are actually a really huge problem and definitely increase the risk of wildfire. Last but not least, more people living at the WUI, which is the wildland-urban interface. So you see a place like this that might have been natural at one time 150 years ago. Now we all live in our nice 1 to 10 acre plots out there, and that causes more fires to start. And why is that? Well, we have before recreation with, campfires, and bullets can actually start sparks. And here we have someone towing something, which is, I started one of those fires. I forget which one it was. But now with all this living here, we also have things like mowers with metal blades and more electricity lines going out into the forest, and more opportunity for trees to fall on top of them and start fires. So the result is that those California wildfires, which were inevitable, are now more frequent, more intense, and we're kind of suffering the consequences. And just to remind you that one of the biggest deals is not actually walls of flame, but it's the burning embers. They can be big like this or small. There can be amazing amounts of them. And any one in particular may not have much energy, but when you bombard a house or a tree with that many embers, it can start fires that quickly turn into devastating infernos. In fact, it's been estimated by this CAL FIRE fellow that as much as 80 to 90% of structures are burned by those embers, not the fire front itself. So plants and fire, they've been dealing with these fire, like I said, for a long time. And you come back and you've got this devastated landscape, and you may feel that it's never going to recover. But take heart. Remember all those ways that we talked about that native plants have of recovering. They do a really good job, unless it's super intense. The areas where it's really intense, it might still get those deep roots. But even in areas of moderate intensity or, the beginnings of high intensity, things can survive. This is a high intensity area of the Caldera fire up near Twin Bridges, and 1 week later, after the fire had come through, these lupin were already resprouting, as was this bracken fern. So as I say, take heart. So the question that often comes, does nature actually need our help after fires? And out in the wildlands, probably not. But where we live, yes, and in the wildlands also it may need some help, especially relating to erosion. But I'm going to focus now on where we live, because that's why most of us are here today. And there are basically, three things to think of. One, erosion control, like I said, is really critical. I'm not going to talk a lot about it because Kit is going to be covering that in more detail, but it's both the disturbed soil and also the problem of that toxic waste from the debris. Then controlling invasive weeds is actually a huge deal after a fire. And restoration, maybe. It can be challenging, and it's really kind of tough to get it right, and timing is critical. So I want to focus just for a second on those invasive plants. They are a special risk after fire because suddenly you get all these wonderful sunny openings, and the invasive plants just love that. And what is an invasive plant? It's a non-native plant. It spreads rapidly. A lot of them are well adapted to disturbance, which is how they kind of got here in the first place. They tend to come from fire adapted climates elsewhere, other Mediterranean climates that are also fire adapted. And they just love that open, sunny, disturbed ground after a fire. So they are bad news. And why? I mean, it's not just, the kind of annoying weed. It's more than just an annoying weed. They can very aggressively reproduce. They outcompete those native plants that are struggling to come back as it is. Completely change a natural plant community. You can have a field that was maybe native bunch grasses, and now it's just a field of, say, star thistle. Can damage the ecosystem. They're bad for agriculture. A lot of them are actually poisonous to livestock and also to wildlife, which can affect the local economy. And with the subject we have here, they definitely can increase the frequency and intensity of wildfires. So if you see here, these are non-native grasses on the left. They're often on the roadside, and those give really hot, flashy fuels that can then take it off into the wildlands. Or again, the star thistle with all this thatch, this dry thatch that gets there, especially in the fall, can be very fire prone. So I'm going to look at about 5 of the specific bad actors, just so that you're familiar with which ones may come up on your property or your lands, and that you really need to watch for at the elevations of, say, Grizzly Flat and higher. Even star thistle can be at those elevations. There's cheatgrass and red brome, which are annual grasses, very flashy fields. I'm not going to go over all the details on how to get rid of these, but I'm going to give you some ideas at the end on how to take care of this. But what you'll see is that they're slightly different. Mowing timing is different depending on which species. Whether hand pilling works or not is different for each species, and when to do it. And so I'll show you a resource at the end on how to figure that all out. Stinkwort is this huge new invasive weed problem in El Dorado County. that's starting to take over. It looks like a little Christmas tree. It's very smelly. It's poisonous to livestock and wildlife, and it can actually make you break out, just like with poison oak, nasty stuff. And it can go from this 1 or 2 plants on the side of a road to something like this in a year. So you really want to watch for that plant on your property, and if it's there, get rid of it. What's kind of odd is that it starts its growth spurt actually in July, when most other things are kind of slowing down, produces seed in late fall, and so if you get it right away before it goes to seed, it can be very effective. So watch for that plant. Another one is spotted knapweed. It was really proliferated after the Cleveland fire, and it actually inhibits the growth of other plants, just like broom does, so it makes it harder for those natives to come back. The seeds can remain dormant as long as 8 years. This thing is tough. And if you get the seedlings, that's great. You can be effective. If you miss them, then you might have to do it three or four times a year if the plant's actually gotten established to try to get rid of it. It's pretty, but it's not really. And lastly, just this is another one, nasty little weed, rush skeleton. It's been found recently along before the fire, along Mormon Immigrant Road and near Sly Park Lake. So watch for it. It's very, it looks a lot like this middle picture where it's got really wiry, highly branched branches with hardly any leaves. There are little yellow flowers, but they're kind of inconspicuous. And what's nasty about this one is you pull one plant out and you'll get 10 more little ones because it spreads by vegetative growth. So if you see it, you want to get it when it's little. You might have to pull it out a couple of times. It's a tough one to get rid of, but it's worth trying. So I mentioned that there's different ways of getting rid of all these, and this is a great guide here, this field guide. It's also got native plants that are really good in it, which is kind of odd, but it does have good advice on the weeds that are in here and specific ways on how to get rid of them. And it identifies with this little red button up here, take action for the ones that are especially bad, and gives you good ideas on how to get rid of them. You also can, the CNPS also has a weeds Facebook group, and Master Gardeners have a helpline, and you can even try the Homegrown Habitat Facebook group from CNPS. In general, though, even though there's specifics for each species, whenever you do get rid of them, do it very carefully because you don't want to disperse those seeds, and you very much want to avoid disturbing the soil because they like disturbed soil, so you have to be kind of careful with these things. It may be something as simple as starting on your own site, but for those really aggressive ones, like that huge patch of stinkwort I showed you, you might need to get more aggressive and even possibly use grazing techniques. Timing is critical, and you might even need to get together with other homeowners in your neighborhood if you see it popping up in a lot of people's property and have some kind of an integrated approach together. The other thing I want to mention is that there is an El Dorado County Noxious Weed Management group that you can consult if you're having trouble. Also, the Resource Conservation District might have advice. And then more on a broader scale is the IPC, which is the Invasive Plant Council, which has a really good website that talks about weeds also. That's a lot on weeds, but that's because they're really a big deal after fires, so watch for them and get rid of them. So if those are the bad ones, what are the best plants to do if, say, you decide to replant an area? And later I'll show that maybe you don't want to replant, but if you do replant, you want to make sure that the plants you choose are low maintenance, that they have good high moisture and low flammability, because you don't want to go through a bad fire again. Natives actually are really good at holding moisture. Not only do they enhance the ecosystem, but they've adapted that they actually hold that moisture pretty well. And you kind of want to emphasize trees near your home that doesn't have as much sap, isn't as fire prone. So hardwoods like oaks might actually be a good tree to have near your house, rather than maybe something more flammable like a pine or a Douglas fir, which are fine just a little further from your house, maybe a lot further, 30 to 100 feet from your house. For all of this, though, it's not necessarily just the right species. Mostly it has to do with spacing and maintenance. That's the key to making your property more fire safe, and Kit will be talking about that later. So then another question that comes up, well, you kind of worry, is the fire going to affect the soil fertility? Is all that ash going to hurt, those plants that are trying to establish? It can actually be, fire can be beneficial to the soil. Ash has lots of good nutrients in it, but on the other hand, the soil can become kind of hydrophobic where it can't absorb water. And so whether the fertility is better or worse after a fire kind of depends on how in your specific area, how hot the fire was and how long the soil heating was, and what kind of soil was there, what kind of plants were there holding it, and then also whether what kind of toxic materials have been added from the burned housing material, burned cars, things like that. So sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. It's not an easy answer. So the other big decision that homeowners need to make is, they've got all these dead trees. Are they dead? Are they going to fall down? Which ones are dead? And so it's kind of, that's a big question. I know it was for us when we went back to the area with our cabin is, what are we going to do with all these dead trees? So the ones that are a risk to people or property, they're maybe going to fall on where you're going to rebuild a house, or they're going to fall on where people are parking. Don't just take this little presentation, please. Consult a professional forester or an arborist to make those decisions, because when they're really important trees that are at risk to people and property, you want to get an expert's opinion. Otherwise, it can actually be a good idea to give it 3 to 5 years. You can't necessarily tell right now. It's going to depend a little bit on what next year's weather is. What's this winter going to be like? If it's a really good wet winter, it might help more trees survive than would if it's a really dry winter. And then it depends partly on the thickness of the cambium, and I'll talk about the cambium in a second, and whether it's one that can resprout or not. And so it can be good to give those trees just a chance to really show what's going to happen. The other thing that happens, especially with conifers, is maybe at first it looks like it's going to survive, but it's struggling so hard, and then bugs get in there and it dies anywhere. So it's good, though, if you can leave the blackened trees in place, if there aren't too many of them, and check again in the spring, and this is a multi-year evaluation. The other thing is that oaks versus pines are very different as you evaluate them. With oaks, you're really going to focus on the trunks. And maybe 3 years is enough to know whether this tree is going to make it or not. For pines, though, instead of the trunks, you're going to really focus on the needles and signs of insect. And it might take a good 5 years or so before you really know whether the tree is going to survive or not. And not just pines, but conifers in general, which would include things like Douglas fir and the other firs higher up. So just a quick review on what cambium is. Cambium is this really tiny layer just under the outer bark and the phloem. And this cambium is what's really critical to the survival of a tree, because that's where the growth happens. That's where new phloem is. The phloem are the ones that bring the nutrients and sugars and stuff around the tree, all to the leaves, down to the roots, all around the whole thing, kind of like a blood supply. And the sapwood over here, the cambium also makes the sapwood, which is what's pulling up the nutrients and the water from the ground. And so it's this cambium layer that's making all this work. And even if the phloem's hurt and the outer bark is hurt, if the cambium survives, you're probably going to have a tree survive. In fact, for an oak especially, if even 10% of the cambium is intact, then the tree might survive. Has a good chance of surviving, actually. So let's look at oaks in particular. So for oaks, and there's a really good document, the UCNR document called Burned Oaks, which will survive. And here's the link, which maybe Tracy or someone can put in the chat. But so you've got these oaks, and you're not going to focus at all on the leaves, because believe it or not, you can have a tree like this where all the leaves have died and that oak might be perfectly fine. The ones that are most likely to survive are the ones that are big, say, bigger than a foot in diameter, that don't have any reduction in bark thickness. In other words, it wasn't enough of a fire that it made the bark get smaller, even if it's scorched all around the base. Or if you just have spotty scorching around the base, and if you have at least 10% cambium, as I said, it will probably survive. So when you look at trees like this, like see this one on the left, and you're trying to decide, okay, is there reduction in bark thickness? Well, just look up and see, is it still in proportion to the tree up here? No, it doesn't look to me like that tree has really lost any of its bark thickness at all. Back here you have one spotty scorching.
Alice, your presentation has disappeared. Yes. I think you need to reload it. You need to share screen again.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. Okay. How many did we lose? I can't hear you, Kit. How many slides did we lose?
You're back. Only one. No, you're right where you left off.
Okay, perfect. So I was saying how you could see here that this tree is still in proportion, so it hasn't lost bark thickness. And back here you do have spotty scorching. And so there you'd want to kind of look at the cambium and see if it's alive or not. And so you go down, you kind of look there, and if you see a lot of these vertical cracks, it's probably not alive still. It probably destroyed the cambium. But the other thing you can do is you can actually make a small cut in the bark, and make it small. These poor trees are stressed, right? But if it has this nice pink color, it's probably alive. If it has this little dark or kind of dried out color, it's probably dead. But again, look and see if you have at least 10% of the cambium. So you might do it in a couple places around the trunk to get an idea for whether the oak is alive or not. And even if it's dead, it will probably still resprout. Most oaks do, and definitely the black oaks at, say, the Grizzly Flats elevation and on up. It's amazing how well they can resprout after a fire. This particular one on the right here has resprouted after 2 different fires, fairly close in proximity. It was within 10 years, and yet it resprouted and was fine. And here's some that's actually resprouting out already after the Caldor fire. So now that was oaks. So think of that as oaks, but that's very different than the conifers. For the conifers, which would be our pines, the ponderosa and sugar pines, our firs, white and red fir, the Douglas fir, incense cedar, for those, the needles matter a lot. And it also varies by which kind of tree quite a bit. So you need to know, okay, what kind of tree is it when you're trying to decide if it's going to die or not? How old is it? Again, because the older ones tend to be more resilient to fire. How healthy was it before the fire? Was it already struggling from the drought? Where exactly is the fire damage? And now again, the scorched crown very much matters. Because if you have a tree like this on the right, where all the needles have burned, it's much, much less likely that it's going to survive. And if they're like this, where they're clearly all dead, here these have a little bit of green, clearly all dead, that tree's dead, unlike the oaks. So for the conifers, a really good resource is CAL FIRE's Survival of Fire Injured, that's supposed to be Injured Conifers in California in 2015, and there's a link to that one. It's got a lot of more detail on what I'm talking about now. But just to give you an overview, you want to try to determine what the percent of the crown kill is. It's good to look when it's backlit so you can really tell which part is that reddish brown that's dead. You also want to look at the branches that might have had needles, because if you're deciding 50% is scorched, you also want to include the branches that don't have any needles at all now as you're making that determination. Especially for some things like ponderosa and Jeffrey pine, you want to wait till spring because you really can't tell right now. It may look worse than it is, and you'll get some spring growth in those pines that might make it better. But you can see how here it might be around 50%. Here you might have only 30% of crown kill. And once you know that, again, it depends on the species, but this particular one, which is pines, it's kind of interesting. So this here is a small ponderosa pine, and this is a large ponderosa pine. You can see how different. So if you have a small ponderosa pine, along the bottom here we have the percentage of the live foliage that's killed, and then here we have the percent survival probability. So to get a 70% probability for a large tree, even 15% of live foliage kills is enough to have it with that amount of survival. But for a small tree, it can have all the way up to 70% crown kill and still have a 70% chance of survival. So it's kind of neat to see that it depends on the size and age of your tree. If we look here at firs and cedars, you can see how different it is for different species. And here the incense cedar, you can have all the way to a 90% live foliage killed and yet have a 30% chance of it surviving, whereas it's less for these other species. If you put all these together, you can see how much it varies. Again, to get that, say to get a 30% chance of survival probability for a large ponderosa pine, make sure I get this right, 40% of the live foliage killed can give it that, whereas for the incense cedar and the small ponderosa pine is much higher. So that just kind of summarizes what we just saw, that for the incense cedar and ponderosa, 90% crown is killed by fire. It still can survive, but if for a sugar pine and big ponderosa, probably not. Another huge thing, though, with conifers, and the second thing to look at is whether it's been attacked by insects. And again, this is likely to come out within another year or two. But the smoke can actually attract the bugs to these trees. It can actually colonize them while they're still smoldering. And it can't. Sometimes it'll affect just the dead wood, which is fine. But if it goes all the way around the tree, your tree's dead. Look for signs of infestation. You've got these little boreholes. If they've got sap in them, that's great. The tree's managing to fight them off. But if it's dry and kind of dusty like this, the tree's probably dying. And lastly, you can also evaluate the cambium with the conifers. If the bark's not blackened at all, it's probably perfectly fine. If it's completely black, it's probably dead. But in between, you can get your axe when you're trying to decide, well, is it or isn't it? And make a very small hole. And we're talking, 1 inch by 1 inch, just a little peephole, a few inches above the ground, and take a look. And the same kind of thing. If it's cream colored and moist, it's probably healthy. If it's dark and dry, it's probably dead. So just a quick recap, wait 3 to 5 years. Even if oak's dead, it may resprout, but look especially at the trunks. For the conifer, go ahead and look at those needles, and it may very much reseed because the few that did survive will set those seeds down in these nice clearings now that are left by the fire or nearby trees. And so reseeding can actually be very effective in bringing these trees back, even if some of the conifers have died. And if it is dead, it does still have value. Its roots are helping to hold the soil, it's preventing erosion, and it's value to wildlife. There's those black-backed woodpeckers and other things that really like dead trees and dead stumps. But for hazard trees, just reminding you, contact a professional. So real quick then, the last thing I'm going to do is go through a nice little post-fire checklist for your land care. Again, every fire is different and every property is different. So you'll have your own unique challenges in healing and restoring your land. But there are some general principles to help guide you so making sound decisions. Safety first. Your burn site truly can be hazardous. Ash from a fire that's in your wood stove or your campfire, no, that's from plant material and it's fine. But the ash from building materials or cars, it really is toxic, and so do be careful around it. They can have asbestos, heavy metals, all kinds of nasty things. Wear protective gear. Consult county officials, get professional help. The county is working with homeowners, you probably know this already, to remove toxic waste. Take it seriously. Don't hurt your soil. Minimize foot traffic. The more you walk around your property right now, that soil is really fragile, and more equipment that's brought in. So you can also trample those any newly sprouting plants. So be gentle, and I think Kit will talk more about that. And do you need to install soil stabilities, things like wattles and stuff, and how's the best way? Again, you might want to consult a professional or the RCD, the Resource Conservation District. Don't go for the non-native seed mixes. Those nice little Western wildflower mixes, or, oh, here's a bunch of great grasses that'll help with erosion. Most of those grasses in those seed mixes, they're short-lived, annual. A lot of them even are invasive. They tend to be shallow rooted, so they don't really help so much with erosion. They're highly flammable by just next summer. And even the ones that say native or wildflower or erosion control may not be. They often have non-local and invasive weeds. I know after the King Fire, they worked hard to bring in some good mulch. Actually, let me get to the mulch page. Okay, so if you are going to do wattles and rocks and branches to try to slow things down, they brought in some of this rice straw that's supposed to be free of weeds, and they ended up with this Johnson grass, this invasive Johnson grass was a real problem. So you just have to be really careful. You can't necessarily believe the labels that some of these things are given. So again, on this checklist, another thing you do really want to look at, though, is helping water drainage. So if your culverts might have gotten clogged up, here we have some of these early rain events and the stuff. It's amazing how different it is after a burn, how much stuff gets washed down, how much debris flow there can be. It's a big deal. And so you want to make sure those culverts are cleaned out so you prevent flooding. And again, if you're going to do these wattles and mulch and rocks, it can help with slowing runoff, but Kit will talk more about that. And then you want to prepare for those high storm flows. We will get some high rains, high intensity rains that will have a much more intense effect on your property than before when there were plants covering that. So you want to try to think now about how are you going to divert that water away from buildings, away from unstable slopes. And you want to do is get it kind of just spread like sheet flow over any well-vegetated areas that might still be there. Also, you're going to need to repair fire breaks because they worked hard to stop fires, and in order to do that, they had to put in fire breaks. and even some backfire lines, but those dozer lines, which helped prevent the fire spreading faster and further, have left behind big areas that might need to be restored. So sometimes water bars actually do more harm than good, but you want to try to get drainage back in the way it should be, kind of blend it all back in with the natural terrain. And that can be a bit challenging, but it is important and worth doing. The other important thing is let plants recover. Give them time. Pruning if you need to reduce a little bit of the fire hazard. The underground roots will stabilize the soil. Most will recover on their own. So in the winter and the spring, watch for those new plants. And you can even have an arborist assess damage if you need to existing vegetation rather than just replanting or seeding. If you are reseeding, there's all kinds of things you need to do to make sure that's done well, and Kit's going to cover that, I believe. And the big deal is be patient. It's hard. I mean, you come to your land and you feel like it's destroyed, but be patient and let things come back on their own. Remember, lands have recovered many times after wildfires in California and here. And once you get rid of some of that, human-made debris that might be toxic, the land will heal on its own in most cases, and just give it time. Thank you. I'm going to pass this on now to Mark Egbert with the RCD.
Okay, thank you very much, Alice. That was a great presentation. I'm going to be talking about our experiences with fire recovery from a perspective of what we did on the King Fire and what we have done with many landowners in cooperation with resource conservation districts and other agencies throughout the state over the last 5 years or so. The examples I'm going to provide are landscape scale treatments, but they have all involved implementation of post-fire recovery actions on private lands. So I welcome any questions anytime. I know that the chat is up and running, but anyway, as I go through this, I hope to explain the context of the presentation. So my name is Mark Egbert. I'm the Executive Director for the El Dorado and Georgetown Divided Resource Conservation Districts. And Tracy, thanks for helping me go through this slide. So next one. Reforestation treatments have historically been closely associated with regeneration activities. And so a lot of people think that after a fire, they want to find out about how they can restore their forests. For example, when landowners go through a high burn severity event, they feel a really hard sense of loss. A lot of people have grown up many generations on the property, and they feel as if this event happened on their watch. And a lot of the landowners just leave the property. They don't feel as if the recovery process is something that they can do. It's something they can handle. It's economically so burdensome for them if they've lost their home or their cabin or something, and they don't really know how to react to it. And so a lot of times they leave. And reforestation has been a symbol of some of the successes that people have, where they plant a tree, and that's the symbol of some of that footprint that they leave on the land for future generations. And so reforestation traditionally has been part of, when someone has a timber harvest plan and they have a planned activity where they remove some trees and then they restore that through assisted reforestation. A lot of times they utilize the funds from the trees that they harvest, and they coincide some site prep. They have good acquisition of seed from native sources, genetically suitable for that area, and they plant at the appropriate time. And so there's relatively, besides the harvest activity, low impact to that regeneration activity. Okay, Tracy. But most of that predictability is lost when we have these catastrophic events, which are unpredictable. These fires are, happening at a scale and magnitude and at a predictability level that is not historically really relevant, because it's not if but when now, and no one's immune. And even people who have defensible space and some stewardship on the land have really seen that these fires dramatically impact their home and the landscape that they live on. And so it really takes a coordination of activities and people need help. There's a sequence of recovery that takes place, and a lot of people deal with recovery of their home, their water, their electricity. You know, a lot of people who've lost insurance over the last couple of years don't have the ability to rebuild. And so their priorities change over time. And if there was a fire that happened on one individual's property, that is one thing, but when it happens across the magnitude of several 100,000 acres, then that's another. Okay, Tracy. And so when we go in and when we work with landowners on restoring their land after an event like the Caldor fire, like the King fire, like the Sand fire, we realize and we see that the restoration and sometimes reforestation is really time sensitive. Without timely reforestation efforts, we see that there are, like Alice mentioned, a lot of undesirable species that can come in, making the establishment of more desirable species difficult. And once those undesirable species become established, it may take decades to pass before more sufficient numbers of the appropriate trees or other desirable species come and reoccupy that site. Okay. So, and then there's the cost of things. You know, when you have a fire, you know, it is true. Most of the time when in a low or moderate burn severity event, you want to be patient. You want the land to recover. The land recovers best on its own most of the time. But whenever you want to recover that land on a time frame that is more sort of immediate, then you can take actions on your own to recover that site, and replanting trees is one option. And the longer you wait, the cost of doing that becomes greater. Okay. So what we do is we have to really look at the field level circumstances and what challenges we see across the landscape. These fires, you know, as you saw in the bear map that Alice presented, there's different levels of fire behavior across the landscape. Some areas unpredictably burn very hot, very fast, and they consume all the fuel that's present on the landscape. In other situations where a fire may come in at night or the winds might not be as high, then you get a really moderate burn, a ground level burn, and it actually becomes a good burn, you know, and sometimes those processes are variable across the landscape, and those challenges that event puts on landowners is variable. So again, it puts diverse demands and it puts pressures and immediate needs on landowners. We know that there are limited resources available for landowners, especially when they have parcels or you know, land that's larger in size. And we understand that there's a sequence of events. And a lot of people want to get in and do things immediately. They want to get in there and remove trees, and they want to get a dozer, or they want to do something, and they want to get a chainsaw out, and they want to try to recover the land as fast as they can. But sometimes there's a sequence of events that happen that you have to work with the land and kind of listen to it and see what it needs and take the appropriate measures at the appropriate time. And so there's a variety of different planning and technical assistance available. And when we go out and we talk to landowners, and I've spent the last few weeks just going out and evaluating the impacts of the Caldor fire on many people's property, and you know, we see that a lot of people have a lot of different needs, and there's a lot of different people out there who can meet those specific needs. There's soil erosion, you know, and then there's hazardous tree removal. There's road establishment, there's access issues, there's water supply issues, and a lot of different demands and challenges that people face. And so we understand that when you restore the landscape through vegetative means, that it has to be part of the sequence of events that can take place. And we understand that the availability of resources is limited. Okay, Tracy. This is a familiar site when a fire comes through an area, and you know, this is a picture that a landowner gave me, and he said, "Hey, Mark, this is what we're dealing with. What can you do?" And it's a really hard circumstance to look at, but I think that, as you all know who have been through these fires, this is an all too familiar sight. Okay. But we also know that different people have different objectives. On my right, you see U.S. Forest Service lands that had high severity burn through a large area. On the left, you had industrial forest land managed by Sierra Pacific Industries. This was within 6 weeks after the King Fire. And within 6 weeks, Sierra Pacific Industry already had removed all of the timber off the property, put the slash piles in piles ready to burn. They put them on the contour as an erosion control measure, and they site prep the soil through deep ripping, as you see in the foreground. So there is a sort of a far left and a far right of the spectrum of what different land managers do. And what we try to do is find somewhere in the middle to provide landowners with assistance of what's appropriate for the landscape and what's appropriate for their goals and their objectives of the land, and really what the land is suitable to do. Okay. So this is a picture that we see happening right now on the Caldor, where PG&E is out there and they're falling trees across the landscape, and they are falling a lot of trees. This basically is a tough situation to deal with when PG&E comes in and falls trees across people's private property, and those trees become a future fire hazard. It becomes access problems. It's aesthetically unpleasing, and it's really hard to manage this type of wood once it's down. It's really expensive to deal with. So, and it's also hard to restore or recover this land with this type of with this much biomass on the ground. Okay. So this is also a situation where a high severity burn happened. You have a complete mortality of the trees, as Alice pointed out, with the needle, composition, and what those trees. These trees are basically dead. This represents a future fire hazard, and so a lot of times when people are looking at a landscape that burnt, they're looking at this, and there might be a lot of understory growth. There might be some recovery happening through the soil, but you're still dealing with a future fire hazard. And the fuel load that this represents in the future is something that you might want to consider when evaluating what you're going to be doing with your property. Okay. Almost there. So again, this is another illustration of a widespread condition of large amounts of fallen trees and residual of dead, unmerchantable trees that need to be cleared. So this landowner in particular, he did have a timber harvest plan where they did remove most of the commercially viable trees. But however, the remaining trees, they either left behind. They did not use any of the revenue that they generated from the timber harvest plan to kind of address this biomass situation on the ground. And again, this presents access issues to the property. It presents future fuel loads. There is some soil rehabilitation properties associated with largely debris on the ground, which is beneficial. However, this is a little bit more abundant than we would probably want to have in a landscape that we're trying to restore. Okay. And I apologize if there's a time delay, but I'm seeing the screen a little bit in delay. So here's another example where a salvage operation was completed, and they actually removed the down trees adjacent the PG&E trees that were falling. You see the PG&E line there. They actually removed all of those large trees that PG&E fell, and they also had slash disposal where they got rid of all the down non-commercial material. And you see where they have a large burn pile there where they burnt all that slash and that residual biomass on site. This is an area that we feel is suitable for reforestation. There's, and when we look at this, we basically say this is suitable for reforestation because if you look around, the seed trees that are alive and in the area are pretty far away. There may be some brush or some other things that might grow in through here, but conifer regeneration is probably going to be delayed because the seed trees are so far away and there's complete mortality of the entire area. The black oak you see above the telephone pole in the middle of the screen, that was completely destroyed, but it did have resprouting down at the bottom of that. So the black oak, we really did not want to touch in this scenario at all because we wanted those to propagate throughout the entire area entirely. And again, this is all private landowners. The parcel sizes were anywhere between 1 and 20 acres. And those properties were connected for the most part. So these landowners had their individual goals and they varied across the landscape. Some landowners wanted to do salvage logging. Some of them wanted to utilize the revenues from that salvage logging to do slash disposal like this. And so it really did vary across the landscape of what each individual landowner did immediately after the fire. Okay. So this is basically after the winter in the spring where brush encroachment came in. We have a lot of ceanothus and other types of brush that came in. And, you know, this is an area where if you want to leave it, that's fine. A lot of people did. Other landowners wanted to restore the conifer component here as much as they could. They wanted to expedite those trees. And so this, if we were going to do a reforestation project here, there would have to be some clearing of the brush to give those, to create an area where we could do some reforestation, some planting areas, and allow those trees to separate themselves from competition and have a chance to grow for at least about 3 years on their own before they could self-compete with that brush. Okay. So when we look at sort of site preparation alternatives, there are several alternatives for site preparation. One is just go out and plant a tree. There is no mechanical or other type of tools that you may want to use to go ahead and go plant a tree. If you have an area that was burned over and completely denuded of the trees and those trees are still there, and you don't have the resources to remove those trees or to do any site prep, it's okay to just go out and plant some trees. You know, that's one option. If you don't have live trees that have the potential to regenerate that site on their own, then reforestation by planting is an option. But some areas that we were involved with, and this is very common throughout the state where we see communities receiving grant funds to do the restoration. These are the practices that CAL FIRE, the NRCS, many other agencies are funding to do this type of restoration. So one of the things that they do is they utilize a brush rake in front of a dozer to push the material into a pile and burn those piles off. There's other things such as once they brush rake that material into a pile, they come in with another dozer with deep rippers on the back of it and they deep rip the soil. That is it basically has an infiltration, potential for increasing infiltration in the soil, reducing erosion, and it provides a better planting medium for trees and those little dams, if you will, and you'll see those in later slides, provides little water catchment areas where water can be, where trees can be planted where it might have a little bit more access to some water. On the bottom, there was brush raking, deep ripping, but they retained a lot of the biomass on the site as soil cover. And I kind of like that. I like as much woody debris on the soil is in my opinion, is really good. So deep brush raking and removing all of that organic material, I don't think is a really good option because it does open the site for invasive species and other types of things to come in and kind of dominate the site. And another thing is wood utilization. as background, I am the chairman of the Caldor Forest Response Team. The Governor's Forest Management Action Plan authorized the development of a pilot program for the Caldor fire. And one of the first things that we are evaluating is what is the market for wood utilization? And in California, there really isn't any. Our mills and other resources for getting some of the dead standing timber off the landscape is really non-existent because the only mill operator owner is Sierra Pacific Industries, and they themselves have lost so much land that their mills are at full capacity for this year and years to come. We also know that the biomass utilization facilities are also very oversaturated with biomass. We just don't have a lot of biomass facilities in California, and those that are there are inundated with material. You can imagine the Dixie Fire alone, the largest wildfire in California history, has so much biomass material coming off of it to feed these biomass facilities that there's just no market for landowners on a small scale to try to put their wood products, forest products into some sort of utilization program. Okay. So there was a question from Tal, if I can. Who would evaluate land for a reforestation plan? Is that the county or the state forester? And where are good places to purchase local trees? So we at the Resource Conservation District can evaluate land for reforestation. And it's really a good question, and I'll get into this a little bit later because let's take the slide right here, for example. This is an area that we removed all of the dead material. We left all of the live trees, and we got rid of the slash and the understory fuel that was present on the site, and we're burning those piles off right now. We did do site prep for reforestation. However, we would not recommend a lot of interplanting in this area because there are so many seed trees in the area that we believe natural regeneration of the site is probably going to present the most suitable, genetically favorable trees for this area. And it has a stocking density appropriate for the site. Now, the soils can produce a lot more trees, like you see, like they can. But as far as immediate action, we could put trees in the ground here, but we probably wouldn't put too many because there are so many good live trees still here. So thank you for that question. Next slide. Oh, and where are good places to purchase local trees? Well, I have a sales agreement with the El Dorado National Forest through their nursery in Camino. And we sell trees throughout California to private landowners specific to the seed zone that they're in. We utilize seed from the LA Moran Reforestation Center run by CAL FIRE, and we also utilize seed from the U.S. Forest Service. So we only provide seedlings to those landowners who request seed and order seeds through us, seedlings through us, but we only provide those trees that are genetically suitable for that area. So this is the King Fire. If you guys know White Meadows, Spring Valley area, this is an area, we did 1,200 acres of private lands in this area that was completely burnt in high severity burn scenarios. And all the trees in this area were absolutely dead. And so this is an area that has gone through site prep. So the dead material was removed. It was piled and burnt. And this is a landscape view of those piles being burnt. We had 1,000 acres burning at one time with these piles. Okay. So this is a site that was one, salvage logged, two, the slash disposal was brought in where we burnt those piles off, and then we deep ripped the soil. And this was a measure that was taken to increase infiltration. We expected a high rain event this winter, and we also wanted to have a good planting medium for the trees. This measure does not have to be, one that every single piece of property does. it's not suitable for most properties. Excuse me. Because we were addressing such a large landscape, and because our time frame was so limited on after the time frame after we planted the trees and the time that we had to help those trees with competition control and release them, which means that we allowed them, given them time to grow without dying from competition or predation from basically hares or any other type of animal. This is a practice that we did. And it's more of an industrial practice. So this is not one that we would recommend on most, if not all, most of all, properties. Okay. And again, we use professional crews to plant trees. These are, again, genetically suitable trees grown right here in Placerville. I think we planted over 800,000 trees in the King Fire. And if you take the time and you invest your resources in a landscape to get to the point where you plant a tree in the ground, you want to make sure that it's done in the right way. So if you plant a tree and you J-root it or you do something wrong, that tree will not survive, and all of the investment in that recovery process is lost. Okay. And this is just a picture of a nice tree that was planted. And again, that tree is 1 year old. It took a year. It grew a year in the nursery, and this is the size of the tree that we would give you from the nursery if you were to do a reforestation program. Okay. Now, this is also a very, very common practice in a lot of areas that we see throughout California, in that if there is a lot of grass or a lot of, undesirable species or competition, brush and things like that, a lot of people spray chemicals across the landscape. This is a measure that we don't recommend most of the time. It's more of an industrial practice. This is a much, you can see the sprayer here. It is just non-selective, broadcast out, and it's spraying everything. Now, what's in here is something that you can spray right over the top of your seedlings, and that material will not kill the seedling, but it will kill everything else. Most of the time when we have grasses like you see there, even though those mostly are European, introduced grasses, we don't like to disturb the soil and denude the soil like that, because it does bring in a lot of invasives. So just as you develop a restoration plan, ask questions, ask how your trees are going to survive, ask how your native, even if there's plants that are alive after the fire, ask how they're going to survive. This is a step that you want to really ask a lot of questions about. And again, most of the time, this is not a recommended practice. But I just wanted to present this because this is what does happen across the landscape in many situations. So ask a lot of questions and talk about the longevity of your investments, about what happens in year 1, what happens in year 2, and what happens in year 5, what happens in year 10, what happens in year 20, and talk about the different types of management practices you want to put on the landscape over time so that you can reach the goals that you set out with. Okay. So project costs. So if you don't do anything really, you could at least develop a management plan. Management plan is really not going to cost you anything. You can get a management plan through the RCD or through the NRCS office, and we can come out and provide a forest management plan that addresses your specific goals and objectives for the property. And it may not entail any of the things that we just went over in the previous slides, but it will be specific to you, and it is provided to you at no cost. If you did have a management plan that involves site preparation, pile burning, planting, and post planting spraying, you can see the cost here. And basically, if you were to do this on your own, those costs would be probably site prep about $500 per acre for brush raking. If you were going to do mastication, it would be at least $500 in a post-fire environment. It could range up to $2,000 an acre if you've got a high severity burn that left a lot of dead material that you want to masticate and remove that material. It could be very expensive. So pile burning, if you did want to pile burn, if you did have the material brush rake, those are the costs associated with that. It's relatively cheap. It's about $125 an acre. And if you had a professional planting crew, you would expect them to be around $150 per acre. And then the competition and control release spraying, if you did want to spray across the landscape, that's probably going to get in the range of $185 to $210 per acre. Of course, there's an economy of scale here. So, and not all of these practices are required. So this is just a whole suite of practices that, again, we see as post-fire restoration activities that have taken place in the Camp Fire, the Napa Complex Fire, the Mountain Fire just down south. We see this happening in Rancho Coyamaca down south of near San Diego. And so this is a traditionally more grant-funded restoration activities. So if you are in the Caldor Fire and you would like to, I mean, basically we're identifying lands that are available for restoration activities that we would manage through a grant. These are some of the activities that would probably take place. Not all of them, again, it's site specific, but this is the type of, these are the costs and the types of practices that we would be putting on the landscape. Okay. So we have worked on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of landowners' property who have been affected by a catastrophic fire. And not all landowners feel the same way about what should happen across the landscape. And that's really good. We learn a lot from people. We worked on lands throughout our history of doing this, where some landowners who did not want to have anything done on their property after the fire came to us 5 years later and said, hey, I can't manage this land and I'm tired of looking at the brush. There's, it's not what I thought would happen. Is there anything that you can do for us? So there's some landowners who came in and said, yeah, I fully participated in this and I expected a lot more. Those trees aren't growing as fast as I thought they would grow. Then there's landowners who taken steps to develop a management plan to do competition control, try to manage some of the brush, and they're very happy, and they've taken a lot of time and investment of their own to manage their property. But it's unpredictable. You can try your best, but things are unpredictable. You don't always know how much or when rain is going to happen. You don't know if there's going to be freeze events or other types of things that nature throws at you. And so nature doesn't always cooperate. And so you always have to be adaptive in your approach to restoring the landscape. And there's a lot of other tools out there that we haven't even discussed that might be viable options for you on a small scale or even a large scale. Okay. So I did mention that the El Dorado RCD, and it's actually, take county out of that, it's just eldoradorcd.org. You can go on our website and find out information about how to order trees. Again, we do grow them at the U.S. Forest Service Placerville Nursery. And we do use the seed bank in LA Moran, and we only plant trees that are genetically suitable for that planting area. Now, we know with climate change and other factors, there are migrational capacities of seedlings to be planted in other areas outside of their original seed zone. Right now, the guidelines are that we would have a 500-foot elevational band of where we could plant a tree 5 foot higher in elevation that would be suitable. So we do work with a scientific panel under the Governor's Forest Management Task Force to identify what those appropriate migrational patterns are for specific species. And we do consult with them to make sure that any tree that we provide anyone is reviewed by the geneticist to make sure that they are suitable for that planting site. Okay. And that's our order form. It talks a little bit about ordering trees, and you can go on. You can keep going, Tracy. Okay, oh, one up. That map of California, there you go. So there are planting seasons. So if you do plan on ordering trees, remember, they do take a year to grow in the nursery, and then you have to know when you want to plant them. So our Sierra Nevada high elevation is really April to May. Sierra Nevada low elevation is really December to mid-March. And I would even say that, principally speaking, the trees are going to be available at the nursery until the time at which you need them. You can pick them up the day before you plant them, or the day that you're going to be planting them. You want your soils to be saturated, and you want your predictable frost freeze days to be low. So you don't want predicted colder temperatures coming in, but you also want to make sure your soil temperature is at 42 degrees and rising and for a most successful planting season. Okay. So two main conditions determine the best planting time. One is the growth stage of the seedling, and we make sure that we provide you, we harden off the seedlings and we freeze them in the cooler, and then we pull them out in advance of when you want to plant them. And there cannot be any time period between when we provide them to you and when you actually put them in the ground. We see a lot of fungus and other things happening with seedlings that are pulled out of the nursery and shipped out that are left sitting there, and then they become, then they pretty much they're not alive anymore. They're just not suitable to be planted. And again, the amount of soil moisture at a depth of greater than 1 foot. So make sure you monitor your soil conditions and make sure you plant at the right time. Now, south and west facing slopes dry out quicker, and high elevation might be affected by late snowfall. So, and also keep in mind that we have a lot of, you see the winds out there right now, dry winds and heat. So, we really see, like, November, we get a nice rainfall, but then it freezes and dries. So when people want to plant grasses and other types of things, they put the seed out, and then it gets really, really cold, and those seeds just freeze up, and it delays that propagation time period until the warmer, sort of the rains start falling, and that freeze sort of starts fading out into more of a rainfall event. So, so those are some of the planting conditions that you might want to take into consideration. All right. So again, just to reiterate, you invest all the time for site prepping your area, and you want to plant a tree. There's a lot of reasons why planted trees don't make it. And sometimes you plant them too deep, you plant them too shallow. Most of the time there's air pockets. Those air pockets are very, very significant for those trees. And you might think that the tree is doing well and so forth, but then it dies. And most of the time it's air pockets that we see. Second is we see L roots or J roots or other types of things. And those are obvious, with the audience that we have here, those are obvious problems that would lead to those seedlings having a high mortality rate. You've got compacted roots. They're not vertical, that's too loose, you've got poor planting soil, or sometimes, most of the time, hopefully, you have a satisfactory planting. And even if you do have a satisfactory planting and the cultural practices are followed and done correctly, we still see probably about a 10% mortality rate of those seedlings across the landscape. So keep that in mind as well. Okay. So here's a diagram of a planting method using the Western planting tool. It's very common. We have those for loan at the RCD. If you wanted to come and borrow some of these, you can definitely do that. But this is a technique One of the things that I would say is that when you put the blade into the ground, it does create somewhat of a smooth surface where the blade went in and where it exited. So you really want to tamp that seedling down with your foot really well to kind of break up that scar face of where that blade entered the ground and where it exited, because that could present somewhat of a barrier to water infiltrating your root zone. Okay. So numbers of trees required. This is a big area of conversation that we talk to landowners about. If an area is completely denuded of trees and there are, you want to replant the site entirely, a commercial forest would probably have about a 12 by 12 spacing. That would give you about 303 trees per acre. Now, if you had 303 trees per acre, we don't, and they grew to be 100 years old, we don't think that that's probably a very healthy forest. It's not very resilient to insect or drought, and it's also not very resilient to wildfire. So our spacing recommendations is really probably around 20 by 20, where we get about 120 trees per acre. And that is, again, in a completely denuded area. In other areas where you have a mix of live trees or some canopy cover, we don't recommend any planting. And so the numbers of trees that you put into the ground should be very, very, it should be thought out and discussed with your forester or a resource professional to make sure that you plant trees and the number of trees appropriate for the site and appropriate for the desired condition that you want. Now, a lot of times people plant more trees than what they want because they know that in 3 years or so, they'll be able to tell which trees have already died, and they can go in and they can remove trees to try to reduce that density to the desired condition that they're looking for. Okay. So oftentimes it's really easy just to plant in rows where you just walk on a line and plant trees at the spacing that you want, and you find micro habitats that you want to plant trees in, like around logs or stumps or rocks and things like that. A lot of people don't like linear spacing because they don't want plantation sort of aesthetically looking forest. So I would randomize it more. And you can randomize it and still get the number of trees per acre that you're looking for. And this is really where you look at your site and you look at where those trees are going to be best suited to be growing. Where do you visually want to see a tree? And so take that into consideration. This is just a sort of a diagram of spacing on a grid that you would use to get your desirable number of trees per acre. But by all means, it doesn't have to be an industrial application to your recovery process. You can vary this as much as possible, as much as you want. Okay. And this is one option for doing that. A lot of people, including the Forest Service, has gone over several years have gone into what we call cluster planting, where they put a 70 cluster per acre of trees, 3 trees per cluster, and they have 25-foot spacing in between the trees. And this works really well if you want a cluster planting with more spacing in between those clusters. The problem comes in when you have a cluster that may not survive. Then you have a wider gap of area that does not have any potential trees that are going to be coming in, and then you may need to implant. Or you may see more shrub-dominated conditions in those areas that have greater openings. I don't think the Forest Service is using this quite as much right now. I know that we have varied our application of this technique, but it's still something to consider. And it's probably most appropriate when your landscape is really more suitable for a cluster planting, where you see more topographical variables in your landscape, and you want to be able to plant trees where they're most appropriately going to have the greatest likelihood of survival. Okay. And then get help. My focus on this presentation was for reforestation of conifer species, but there's a lot of different other options. I would say most of the properties I've already visited on the Cantelow fire, my recommendation has been to leave it alone. And So you don't have to go through the extent of all of the, actions that I presented in this slide. This was more of a, high severity, total disaster burn area, which, Grizzly Flat, there's a lot of, hazardous trees and a lot of material out there. And we're getting people who are calling us saying, can we just replant the forest? So get help. Every plan is site specific, and every plan is specific to the objectives of the landowner. We try to make it as holistic as possible, meaning we try to incorporate other types of restoration activities besides reforestation and field load reduction. And we pull in resource professionals who can help us. So we know that the University of California Extension is one partner that we bring in a lot. And I'm really happy that the Master Gardeners are involved in our forest recovery team to help us identify where important communities are, so that we don't take any actions to further damage the landscape. And I think that as much information as we have from these professionals, the better off we are to helping the landowner understand what is best for the land and really achieving their goals. The other thing that I would say is that there's a lot of other attributes across the landscape that we want to consider. A lot of times we look at what the terrestrial wildlife use was of the landscape. We look at the migratory birds, we look at nesting birds, we look at a lot of different things that we try to recover in the process. It's not just a tree, it's not just the soil, but it's a lot of other things. And so we really want to take those things into consideration and come up with as much of a holistic plan as possible. And Alice asked, are they conifers or oaks? So we only do conifers in our nursery. We do not have an oak nursery. Oaks are really hard to propagate in a nursery. I would encourage everyone to start their own nursery at home. I've got one for my blue oaks, but really, with oaks, they're hardy. They are resilient. They do sprout, and you'd be surprised about the recovery of oaks in a landscape. So yes, conifers, it includes all cedars, firs, and all other conifers, all conifer species in the state of California, if you will.
Mark, the question that Alice had answered to Steffi had the question of our property has had many trees cut down by PG&E, including trees that were still alive. What's the best method for getting rid of stumps that they leave behind? And so Alice asked the question for clarification, are they conifers or oak stumps? So do you have an answer to the how do you deal with stumps question?
Well, it's interesting. Yesterday I met with a community, and they're utilizing some insurance money and so forth to remove the trees and to remove the stumps, because they don't want those stumps there, and they know that the trees are no longer there. So they are tub grinding all of the stumps. They're pulling them out of the ground and they're putting them into a tub grinder, and the chips are being broadcast throughout the landscape. That is with both the oak and pine and fir species and cedar species. So otherwise, I would make sure that there's a safety issue. In a post-fire environment, those stumps, if they're burnt through, can have a safety issue. They burn down and you can fall down into a stump hole, and that's really dangerous. There's also, but otherwise, we don't have a program to remove stumps. It's so costly to do that. We generally leave those there. And one of the reasons is cost. The other reason is slope stability. That's another reason why we leave those stumps there. Okay. I think there's a question from Sam about for the Native Plant Society.
So this is, and I can answer that question since I'm the plant sale coordinator. And we can definitely, I think I want to bring this up with our board about having a special program for people that have been affected by the Caldor fire, and have a special purchase program that is focused on that as opposed to part of our plant sale where everything goes online and it's a free for all for ordering. So Sam, I will get back to you on that. It's a discussion that our board needs to have on how we deal with that, but kind of ahead of on you on that one because I've been thinking about it already myself. So thank you for bringing it up.
And I see about the minimum order quantity question. Our minimum order is 200 trees per species because that's, how we box them. But we really encourage landowners to work with each other where you may have multiple landowners in an area and one landowner may need 50 and another landowner might need 25. And so we encourage you to do that. You can also, any trees that you have, you can bed them in, and let them grow in a bed of, chips or mulch or soil or whatever, and then wait a year, grow them for a year and then plant them later if you see that you have the need. Our price is $444 per 1,000 trees, so 44 cents a tree. So at that rate, I think you've got some ability to do that. But we do see a lot of landowners partnering with each other on these orders.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mark. We appreciate your time. And I'm going to turn this over to Kit, and you'll take us through our final moments of this class. Thank you. But Kit, you're muted.
Yes, I just saw that. So somebody asked how to find an arborist. Go to treesaregood.org. It is part of the International Society of Arboriculture. There you'll be able to, there's a Find an Arborist tab there that you can find a certified arborist. So I'll answer that question. Okay, I'm going to go to share my screen. And this is going to be a little bit of a real run through because this is the time we should be starting our questions and answer session part of this. And there's a lot to go through in terms of, so I'm going to be really sliding through the erosion control, soil erosion control. I'm probably not even going to be able to bring up defensible space for some of those of you who perhaps have your home still standing, but your vegetation has been burned. So I will, at the very end, there'll be a link to another presentation that has all the information having to do with defensible space, because as you start going down the road, planning your new homes and doing all of that, you definitely want to take all of those suggestions to heart as you plan the area around your home. So anyway, I'm going to go through and talk about soil erosion and seeding and erosion control. Whoops, excuse me, go back. And I need to get rid of this so I can see my screen. Okay. So anyway, as we've talked about, we realize that losing all this vegetation has now created major problems with potential erosion, especially as winter is coming on soon here, hopefully. And with all that vegetation gone, there's no longer protection for the soil from the elements, and rain can cause a lot of compaction and obviously a lot of erosion. So leaving some of that material there is going to be one of the ways that you can protect your soil through the winter. Is just don't rake that all off yet, leave it sit. Hydrophobic soils are those hydrophobic soils for those that have been affected by probably extreme temperatures related to the fire, and essentially baking them, making them water repellent. And if that happens through the winter, with the rains coming on, they'll start to wet. Don't worry too much about it. But one of the problems with hydrophobic soils is that now that water is going to more run off rather than sink into the soil. So it's something you need to keep an eye on. These basic 4 tips to combat soil erosion, I mentioned: leave the mess, keep any ash, debris, etc. that's not toxic materials from your home or other structures, but leave that in place as much as you can. The charred remains of plant material can actually help protect that soil. But if you don't have any of that, then either spreading some chips, wood chips, which I would imagine there'll be a lot of that available soon as they're removing the trees. Hopefully they'll be chipping that material, or mulch from dead debris, and the weed-free rice straw. As long as you are not near a riparian area, that should be fairly safe to use. As Alice mentioned that in another area where they thought it was weed-free and it wasn't, it had Johnson grass in it. So you really want to try to make sure you are specifying, you're specifically buying weed-free materials. Again, it's very tempting to want to clean out all that burned vegetation, but it's going to help you keep your soil stable through the winter. And whether you consult with a fire restoration specialist or the RCD is going to be the free avenue. If somebody could, could everybody make sure they're muted, please? And so again, doing nothing for a while, especially as we're coming into winter, is going to be one of the things that patient's going to allow you to see whether or not you have any issues, and allow nature to start, the seedlings that are in the soil, the seeds in the soil will start providing some protection and stabilization for you. So again, only removing high hazard vegetation, trees that are apt to fall on a home, or close to the home sites, especially if you still have a home there, getting those felled. And in extremely impacted areas particularly where they bulldoze fire lines, some of this, the soil's been disturbed, mulching might be necessary because the soil has been probably cleared to bare dirt. It has no vegetation to protect it. So if you have lines across your property, putting down mulch there will help provide some protection. And again, Alice brought this up, keeping the traffic, whether it's foot traffic or equipment, keeping that to an absolute minimum, and not removing the burnt vegetation, especially as the rains start to come. The worst combination in terms of compaction and doing damage to your soils is they're getting wet and then you're getting on them, and it just really compounds the issue. So really reduce the amount that you're doing on the soils for a while until plant material starts to start popping up. And especially on slopes, what you don't want to do is to break down that soil structure, making it even more prone to erosion. So minimal disturbance, the less the better. And keep an eye on the stormwater runoff that might be occurring on your property. If you living on site, you'll be well suited to do that. If you're not, you might ask if any of your neighbors are sort of around, kind of working cooperatively with your neighbors to keep an eye on what's happening with the stormwater during the winter. This 4S practices to slow, spread, sink, or store water is a principle that you always want, whether your land has been burned or not. Harvesting water or capturing it and sinking it on your property is one of the things that will help you against drought, in terms of you really want to try to capture and not have your water running off the property. And your straw mulch, that's another one. Besides wood chips, using straw mulch is another way that you can reduce the impact of rainfall. just spreading a light 1 to 2 inch layer of straw mulch across your areas that are vulnerable to rain. If they don't have other vegetation on them, then getting something on your soil will help protect it. Straw wattles and again, thin can be used. You can see how in this upper corner, straw wattles are used to keep the rain or water from running directly down slope, and it slows it down and allows it to sink in. Or use logs or branches that are on site and put them across areas that are showing signs of erosion. Again, allowing water to sink in rather than run off and cause more damage. So pay attention to how that water is moving. This is an instance in which the wattles are being used through a ditch on the side of a road. That'll help slow water down and keep things from really eroding more. Getting that on-site assessment from the RCD or other, I'm not sure really how much assessment CAL FIRE provides. I think they've got their hands full still with fighting fires. So looking to the RCD for help with this would be the best way to go. In terms of other concerns, and especially in terms of flooding and debris flows, it would take an unusually large storm to cause that kind of damage. And we usually get some advance notice that that's what's going to occur. But anyway, again, if you think you have the propensity or potential for that kind of damage on your property and you're concerned about it, either call the county, possibly Public Works could assist you, or again, going back to the RCD. Going through this quickly. Not even going to talk about the soils being hydrophobic. You can read more about this later. It probably shouldn't be a tremendous problem for most people. And really the solution is to allow the rains to come and eventually they will get wetted. But don't be breaking, even if they're hydrophobic, don't break them up. Again, that opens them up for further just dissolving and running off, makes things worse again. So less disturbance, the better. In terms of what techniques you can employ for erosion control, so we really don't have enough time to seed perennial grasses and have them start to come up and provide any measure of control. They're just not going to be able to get big enough and have roots substantial enough to hold the soil together. So it's usually not necessary. There's enough seed bank in that soil that will start coming up on its own. So it's not something you have to worry about unless, like I said, unless you've got areas like a bulldozer line where they have cleared out a tremendous amount of that seed bank and done it deeply. I have been amazed to see that, see with the disturbance I've done with my own landscaping, that there's always something coming up. It's amazing how deep seed banks run. And again, using mulch and straw can be effective. Please do not use annual non-local grasses for erosion control. This is an old style recommendations that are still called out, particularly by engineers for slope stabilization, etc. But these annual grasses that are non-native are one of the major causes for increased fire danger in our area anymore. So you really want to avoid those. They do, as Alice showed, where they become the fuels for flashy fires and really get things started. You don't want to use any non-local seed in particular. Try to get it more locally if you really feel you need to address areas. and continue to look for those invasive plants. If I think we have a dog who's in trouble. With respect to, again, using the straw, gone through that already, or non-sterile. So sterile, non-resistant plant seeds, such as barley, sterile wheat or barley can be used because those get established again. And you don't have the time to do that now. Get them established for winter. But if you look something like that, because those will grow up, they won't have seed heads, or they'll have seed heads, but they'll be sterile, and so they won't contribute to a problem later down the road in reseeding and expanding. Skip that one. So hydromulching is another option that you might have, but this is typically for larger areas. And what they do is they simply put it into a big hopper with water and surfactants and blow the mulch across the landscape. Now, also there is hydroseeding, in which there's seed mix in this, but again, those are generally end up creating more problems than they can fix, just in that they contribute to this huge weed load, again in the spring, causing more potential for fire danger. But the hydromulching itself, if you have the type of site that warrants it, may be helpful. Hydromulching is expensive because of the equipment involved, and typically you can't get more than 300 feet away because the trucks are so big they have to be on a paved surface or a very well graded road in terms of having access. And they're not good for steeper slopes or for severely disturbed slopes. So hydromulching typically is not recommended for most applications, but it's something you're going to be hearing about. People are going to maybe be suggesting it. So we all know that hay is for horses, but straw is for mulching. So to distinguish, hay is the stuff that we feed our animals, our horses, and our other farm animals. It's got the seeds in it, like oats and grasses, high protein. Straw is what's left over after those things have been harvested, and that's what you want to be looking for, and particularly weed-free straw, which is created especially for erosion control. Doesn't mean it'll always be 100% weed-free. I've used it on my own property and have still spending time 5 years later pulling some of the grasses that came out of that. And then around your home sites itself, using wood chip mulches or some type of mulch to cover any bare dirt is something that you want to do as well to stabilize and keep the compaction from happening. Done right, it's the most effective method you can use to prevent erosion and runoff and all the rest, and sedimentation. So we've already talked about barley or wheat straw. Then these notes will, and don't use whole bales of hay because they actually can act like a brick wall, and the sediment can't go through them because they're just too dense. The straw needs to be spread out, and that's actually what wattles are made for. So if you want to use something like that, get some straw wattles. They're less dense and the water will move through them, but capture the sediment. So the concern, again, we've talked enough about straw mulching and weed seeds. One of the things you don't want to do is find yourself with another fire hazard next summer. So the wattles, and I'll show you a picture of them, are really designed for shorter, less steep slopes. And in terms of, I get it, why people are wanting to get seeds for their property, because we do have a real tendency as humans to want to fix something that's broken. you want to go back and you want to try to make your home place look like it did before. And it's unfortunately going to take some time for that to happen. And natural regeneration is going to be one of the best scenarios, not only because it's the more native plants, but it's what's going to be what provides a safer environment down the road, less prone to fire. Let's see, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm really trying to, let's see, if I seed, where should I do it? So again, seeding really is no longer recommended as like it used to be in the past for burned areas, but around your home site would be the one place to perhaps consider doing that, because it will probably be fairly bare there. Again, the fire line, roads, etc., is where you can focus that attention if you feel like you do need to do something or want to do something. So finding those native wild seeds. Somebody asked the question as to where to get a Larner seeds. Somebody specifically asked about Larner seeds as a source. And the thing is, I don't really have an answer, because some of those, I know that Larner is a particularly well-known for their quality of seeds. They're a native California seed company. I don't know what our resources are locally for finding wildflower seeds or perennial native seeds in our area, but we will get back to you on our website with CNPS, eldoradocnps.org, and on the Homegrown Habitat page with answers to these questions. So again, I think we've already mentioned that really the seeding is not any more effective than letting what seed already exists in the soil germinate and grow. So the first rains, I'm already seeing weed seed from the little bit of rain that we've already had. I'm seeing green come up out on my property. And so I would imagine you're going to be seeing that relatively soon as well. And again, Alice showed some photos of plants already regenerating. And seeding, and particularly on steep slopes, unless you hydroseed it on, is really kind of just throwing money out the window, because most of that seed's going to end up at the bottom of the slope. And it actually, putting seed on competes with the native natural vegetation and slows down that regeneration that would naturally occur, because you have more competition for water and nutrients in the soil. I'm just going to skip that one. The potential negatives, we've already talked about that. And another aspect of it is again, it's that competition for moisture and nutrients. Just mentioned that. Just very marginal effects if you put it down now. Most of that is not going to germinate and do what you want. And the other aspect to consider is the fact that using seeding might increase your pocket gopher activity, because those nice new tender plants starting to try to get established is food for them. So that is something that I think that would be adding insult to injury. You've already got enough to deal with in terms of rebuilding, re-landscaping, and the last thing you want to do is invite a whole new population of pests into the landscape. So again, the fire hazard, we're going to go. So starting over now in the landscaping, and I think I'm gonna pause here for a minute. And Tracy, what's your feel on this in terms of going? Because I don't want everybody to miss out on the question and answer.
Sure, it's 7:20. It's 7:30.
Okay.
So let's do about 10 more minutes, Kit.
Okay, I'm just going to run through. I've got like 5 more slides before I get into the defensible space, but and thinking about the dog, of course, wants to play. Starting over with your landscape in terms of rethinking your entire property. Hopefully, you want to rethink it in a way that you never make yourself susceptible to this again. So go back to that post-check fire list and consult professionals in terms of what we've talked about in terms of erosion, the dead trees that need to be removed. You need to address your drainage systems, but really try to avoid, you've got a lot of cleanup to do already in terms of your homes, and getting that stuff moved off the site before you can even do anything else. But try not to disturb the areas out from the floor print of your home itself. Try to leave those soils alone and intact. And then again, you'll wait and see what shows up. And you'll have hands, you'll probably see enough invasive weeds starting to come up. If nothing else, just annual grasses. Hopefully that's all you get. But those are something that if you have the ability, you should probably try to get a handle on. It'll make it a lot easier as you move on down the road to do other landscaping that will be less fire prone. And then planting a new native garden, I would really encourage you to use natives, primarily because they are, believe it or not, they are less fire prone compared to introduced species. And there's a whole nother class on that stuff. So we can talk more about that as we go on down the road. By spring, I should have a whole presentation ready to go in terms of native plant design, using how to actually go about planting your new yard. So anyway, so focus on maintenance and the zones around your home. Well, this is if your landscape is still intact. I don't know if anybody's here that's listening to this aspect of it, but if you may not have your home. Oftentimes what happens is the embers have burned the home down, but your landscaping is still there. So one of the things you want to take a look at is what is still there and look at how you can have that conform to the standards that are required for defensible space. And then transitioning over to a native plant palette, which will reduce the potential for fire and also reduce your water use. So I would urge you to avoid planting invasive species as you move on down the road. There's a whole list of plants in this presentation and the other one that's on fire resiliency. Look out for native vegetation that's already growing nearby. And then just remember, starting small is fine. You've got your hands full with already planning and rebuilding. And so your landscaping's going to occur after that. One of the things that most likely you would be required to do is to submit a landscape plan with your house plan because of laws in place within the state and meet those regulations, but that'll all be addressed by the building department. So it's something you might want to be thinking about as you're already starting to plan for your new home. So this is where, if you aren't aware already, and I'm going to go 2 more slides. So defensible space planning is working from the house out. And one of the things you just really need to be aware of is that after the campfire happened, there have been lots of changes in building codes with respect to having to create hardened homes and defensible space. And both statewide, SB 63 was just signed this year, I believe, that has all kinds of standards, but it's those are already incorporated into El Dorado County's vegetation management ordinance, which requires the establishment of defensible space around all homes. So those are something that you're going to be hearing. If you're not already familiar with them, you're going to be finding out a lot more about them through this process to rebuild. And what it does is it creates these fuel breaks that keep material from burning right around your home and creating even more embers that may be blowing in from a fire already. So with that, I am going to, we're just going to go to questions and answers so that we can answer your questions. Thank you.